One of the other things my students say to me in the Living Scripture class is they're shocked at people's behavior, and they're shocked that people's behavior is, I would say, more realistic than you would think it would be in the Bible. It's certainly more realistic than the kind of bland lack of passion that is preached to us at the homilies we hear. So today we're going to deal with some rather disturbing emotions, I would say. Let's take a look at what happens in Exodus. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. God's finger makes those marks on this first set of tablets with the commandments. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is the sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It is not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing I hear. They're having a party." When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf, the golden calf, and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. The tablets inscribed by God, that he'd been up in the mountain for 40 days or whatever it was, waiting for this revelation. He crushes them in his anger. And he took the calf, the golden calf, the idol, the false god the people had made, and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites to drink it. People don't do this even with dogs anymore, but in the old days, if a dog would make a mess in the house, people would take the dog and shove his nose into the mess he had made. Even that's considered inhumane these days. In fact, my son tells me that all of his friends have dogs who are completely out of control. They don't do the first thing to teach these dogs basic behavior. At any rate, that's kind of what Moses is doing. Oh, you want a false god? Here's a false god for you. Drink it. I'm going to take the gold of this abomination you have made. I'm going to crush it, and I'm going to force it down your throats. This is not bland stuff. This is not, oh, and now a reading from the book of Exodus. And then Moses came down the mountain. Moses is beside himself with anger. And not just Moses. Okay? He said to Aaron, his brother, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. You know who we're dealing with here. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. He ain't coming down from the mountain." So I told them, "Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off, the very gold that they stole as booty and plunder from the Egyptians. This is probably the gold of the Egyptians." They gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Whoops! Well, if that's true, if the calf just kind of came out of the fire, that in itself is miraculous, but probably demonically miraculous. Or Aaron is kind of, Aaron's kind of making himself sound better than he really is. It sounds more as if they fashioned this as a deliberate calf to worship. Moses saw that the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies, like dogs that you don't bother to train. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. We'll talk about the Levites in a minute. Then he said to them, to the Levites, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. This is from the Lord. Levites, take your sword, put it at your side, go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as the Lord commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers. and he has blessed you this day. The next day Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. And before we get to that, okay, that's a little shocking. It's certainly brutal. Okay, tribe of Levi, take your swords. This is what God wants you to do. And go around and kill your own family members if they're not standing for the Lord. You have to understand, I think the implication is these are the people who aren't coming forward. At any rate, it's a kind of retribution from the Lord, according to Moses, upon the people who are worshiping the false god. Now, it's shocking, it's disturbing. It reminds us of terrorism. It reminds us of the way the Muslims who were on fire for their faith destroyed the World Trade Center and other places. It's a kind of religious zeal, and it disturbs us. Now, without trying to make a defense for this, remember the context. You can't really understand anything in the Bible or in life without putting it in context, meaning you have to back up a bit and realize, how does this figure in the overall story? You've got to remember, first of all, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were living in what is, in general, we would call the area of Palestine or the Middle East, on the eastern side of the Red Sea, not in Egypt, 2000 BC and thereabouts. And that when Joseph and the brothers eventually all end up in Egypt, they eventually end up as slaves. But remember, the revelation of God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they weren't quite getting it. I mean, it's a brand new thing in human history, God choosing these individuals and this people to follow him. When the Israelites come out of Egypt, God has done these incredible things for them. The 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the feeding them in the wilderness. He's led them. He's saved them. He is clearly delivering them. And the first chance they get to doubt him, not only do they doubt him, but they rush with a fervor towards setting up a false god. Now, the gods around them, in the area they were going into, the promised land, everyone was not only worshiping false gods, but sacrificing their children to them. Moloch in particular. They would burn their children alive, not just babies or pre-born children. Children of the age of reason would be burned alive. This stuff happened in the Americas as well. The native people in North and South America did quite a bit of this too. The actual human sacrifice of living people was going on all around the Jews in this area. And had they in fact given themselves over to these gods of their own making or to the gods of the people around them, they would have been indistinguishable from these people. The Lord was setting them apart and training them. They were to be set apart. To be holy means to be set apart. Well, who gets set apart in this story? The Levites. Why do the Levites get set apart? Because of their zeal. They step forward. I'm for God. I'm against the false god. Okay, Levites, then here's what you're going to do in your zeal. As punishment, you're going to show these people that this is serious. This is a matter of life or death. Now, even though we find this disturbing, if you look at Matthew 10:37, which we had read earlier, you know this passage. This is Jesus talking. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Now, this is, again, not an excuse for mere religious bigotry or for committing acts of violence in the name of religion, but what is it? It's almost like saying, you know what? Sex gives us a lot of trouble as human beings, so we're all going to take medication that completely takes away our sexual desire. Well, that would, within a generation, put an end to the human race. Or we could say, you know what, anger gives us a lot of trouble, so we're going to take a medication that we'll never be angry again. We'll just be floating around. Well, then we would be easy prey for injustice and we would allow horrible things to happen. These days, we recognize that loving your brother and your sister and your mother and your father is part of loving God. But as Jesus says, God comes first. Now, this doesn't mean this dogmatic notion of God. This doesn't mean that you kill people that don't agree with you on who God is. What it means is you have to have an ultimate value and an ultimate being, an ultimate source of being that you place above all others, or you recognize is objectively placed above all others, so that your love for everything before it is ordered and not disordered. Now, of course, this is what we know from Revelation and from 2,000 years of history since Christ. It's not explicit, certainly, in this story from Exodus. But let's take a look at, well, first of all, who are the Levites? I know I'm going on a bit. I'm going to try to wrap this up before too much longer. Okay, who are the Levites? Well, just to remind you, there were 12 tribes of Israel. Well, we're going to get to Psalm 109 in a minute. The Israelite story begins with some of the culture heroes of the Jewish people, the patriarchs. The Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, traces the Israelites to the patriarch Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was Abraham's grandson. You'll remember this if you took class with me, and even if you didn't, if you've read Genesis, you will know this. Who was renamed Israel after a mysterious incident in which he wrestles all night with God or an angel. Jacob's 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. In order of birth, they were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. The 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph becomes split into 2 tribes, but Levi was the third born of Jacob's sons. Now, Moses and Aaron are of the tribe of Levi. They can trace their ancestry back to Levi. They are Levites. The men who come forward when Moses calls them forward, the men who then slaughter the others, are Levites. They are relatives of Aaron and Moses, descended from Levi, who is the great-grandson of Abraham. So they're from that tribe, that community, that clan. The Levites become the priests, the priestly order in the Old Testament, and we'll see that develop as we continue to read. They become the priests in the same way that our Catholic priests are priests. They function primarily performing all of the liturgical and religious ceremonies that the Jews develop, and they become the human bridges between man and God in the same way that Moses is, because Moses goes back, remember, and this story ends with Moses convincing God once again not to blot the Israelites out of the book, and he stands in for them as a kind of guarantee or surety. Let's look at that real quick, and then we'll move on, and then I'll wrap this up, since, these are supposed to be short little videos, and they almost never are. Okay, we got to go up and find this. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold." You think we don't make gold a god these days? How many people love money more than they do anything else? "But now please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." He is a Christ figure. Destroy me rather than them. I will take their punishment upon me, even though I am innocent. That's exactly what Christ does for us. The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." So God maintains his right to justice and vengeance when it comes due. Now, if you notice Psalm 109, oh, by the way, and the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. Punishment, due punishment. Psalm 109 is what we call a psalm of imprecation or cursing. It's all about how these awful people have done these things to me, apparently to David, who is the traditional author, and he is praying a series of curses against them. He is saying, they repay me evil for good and hatred for friendship, appoint an evil man to oppose him, let an accuser stand at his right hand. That can be translated, let the evil one oppose him, let Satan stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, etc. May his days be few. May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. Now, all of this we find disturbing, of course. But then we get to well, here it is, if I can find it. Our gospel reading, which is where Jesus goes into the temple. Now, Jesus in the temple throws everybody out who's taking the holy place and making it a mere place of money making. And this is from the Gospel of John, because this same story is told in John. But what do they say in the Gospel of John? This is the same passage that we read today in Matthew. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. When the Jewish Passover was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and money changers, seated at their tables. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. This is angry Jesus. We never hear about angry Jesus. He poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He violently smashes, in the same way he smashes this false marketplace in the temple, the same way that Moses smashed the golden calf and ground it to powder and makes the Israelites drink it. To those selling doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a marketplace?" In Matthew, he calls it a den of thieves, and he's quoting Isaiah when he says that. His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." It is written because that is from Psalm 69:9. Zeal for your house will consume me. If you don't believe me, you can click on it. Because zeal for your house has consumed me, and the insults of those who insulted you have fallen on me. So, before we get all freaked out about the violence in Exodus and the Psalm of Imprecation, Psalm 109, it's a form of zeal. What is zeal? It means you care. If your parents really care about raising you as a good kid and you do something horrifically wrong, they're not going to let you get away with it. Not because they're evil parents, although it may seem so when you're being punished, but because they are zealous for your own good. If you're married to a woman and you find that she's cheating on you, you don't put up with it. Not because you're prone to anger, but because you care enough about the relationship not to let that happen. If you have a dog who keeps making a mess in the house, you train that dog not to do it. And if you get angry at the dog, that's part of it. Because Jesus himself gets angry. Wrath is a sin, but wrath is anger, giving ourselves over to anger, anger without restraint. Controlled anger, righteous anger, rational anger is not a sin. Now, we're shocked at the Levites slaughtering their family members, but this is what sets them apart. This is what shows God and Moses that they're serious about becoming different kinds of people. not the sorts of people who will be living around them burning their children in the fire, not the sorts of people whose culture they came out of, different sorts of people, people holy, people raised a notch. Now again, the Muslims were zealous, who destroyed the World Trade Center and other places. Zeal has to be controlled by prudence and by love. But unless you're loving, you won't be zealous. Unless you care, you won't even begin to do what Jesus did and purge his Father's house. Our Father's house could be purged these days too. Not sure if you've noticed that. And if you just let it go and you don't care, you're not zealous. Of course, you can't be so zealous that you go around killing people. These things have to take place in the context of love. But without it, it would be like taking drugs so we're never angry, so that we never have sexual desire, so that we never have desire to get out of bed and make money or make something great. All of these things may make life simpler, but they would also make us spiritually dead. And Jesus shows us what it's like to be alive, as does Moses, with as angry as he gets, and even the Levites. So, of course, I'm not telling you to go out and start slaughtering people, but I am saying we need to be zealous. It's uncomfortable for us, and it will be uncomfortable for the people who don't like our zeal. The money changers did not like being chased from the temple. Anyway, that's trying to put everything into context, including the Psalms of imprecation. All right, this was a long one. More next time.